What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg. We like magic, and today I'm taking the wheel. So far this season, my patrons have determined all the decks that we've teched, but today I'm taking control to show you what I believe to be the best competitive deck in Standard Magic right now, and that's Red-White Midrange. But before we get to it, make sure you do all the YouTube stuff, quick plug. Just make sure you like the video, subscribe if you haven't done it yet, and let's talk about my build of Boros Mid.
Yeah, just waking up can tell it's gonna be a great day. Look out my window, sun shining on the freeway. For one day I'm getting paid enough. I'm barely out of bed, I'm already blazing up. Feel like something in my soul is just raising up. I got a bounce in my step and I'm hanging up.
First things first, you'll notice back there in the intro a second ago, I slipped in that this is specifically my build of Boros Mid, and the reason I say that so pointedly is because I've already seen this thing built 8 or 10 or 12 different ways online right now, and they're all relatively successful. And there's a bunch of different ways you can brew this thing up. There's just obviously Boros aggro. A lot of people have tried it. Not a bad deck. But there's also the deck that plays Resplendent in the 3-drop slots, kind of an angel tribal deck on the top end. It's pretty cool. There's a mono red-ish deck that plays like Steamkin in the 2-drop slot and Shane Whirler in the 3, but also splashes white cards. And there's a ton of other ways that you can build this, and we'll talk about all those a little bit towards the end of the video, but my build is specifically more of a traditional mid-range rock type build, lots of removal, but also a lot of good top end, which is mostly ported over from a good deal of the other builds of the deck. We get to play Lyra Dawnbringer in here, which is just ludicrous in terms of just raw stats. So we'll definitely play at least 3 of this, and I've seen people on 4, but we're not really doing the Angel Tribal thing, so I think 3 copies of Lyra is fine. And yeah, by the way, I am saying Lyra. I know that bugs some people, but I actually did some research on this, little side note, and it comes from the Greek. It can either be in reference to astronomy or the stars, or it can be in reference to music, i.e. the word lyric, which is, I think, a lot prettier than saying Lyra, but the name did, in 2015, end up on the top 1,000 new baby names in the United States. You can pronounce it either Lyra or Lyra. I like Lyra. But anyway, let's talk about the function of the card for a second, because my ADD is showing. And it's not a joke, by the way. I was diagnosed ADD along with every other kid in the 90s, but anyway, ADD showing again. Let's focus and get to what the card actually does. Just ludicrous in terms of raw stats. Nobody has to tell you that. A 5-mana 5/5 flyer with first strike, so it survives almost any combat interaction, and really importantly, it has lifelink. So if it comes down against, say, an aggro deck, then it's just Swingsville. If they can't answer it immediately, then they're going to have a really tough time finishing that game, even if they got you at like 4. Plus, don't forget, let's not neglect that it has another line of text on it, which makes playing other angels really relevant. So we're going to play 2 copies of Shalai in the deck too, and another angel. We'll get to that in just a second. Shalai is really important as well. First of all, this protects us from Settle the Wreckage, and yes, it does. There are some players still not quite aware of that, but Settle the Wreckage targets players, and obviously Shalai doesn't let them do that. So this does protect against Settle the Wreckage, and once Shalai is down, they have to take care of it before they can take care of your Lyra Dawnbringers or any of your other ridiculous creatures you got out. It's also another flying creature. You'll note as we go through here, the deck has a lot of flying creatures. The majority of our threat base flies, which is really important right now against the various green and green-black decks that we're seeing a good bit of. They're fairly weak to flyers, which makes cards like Aurelia really, really good too. This is yet another angel to go with Lyra. Again, I'm not going all the way and playing Angel Tribal here or anything, but it is an important thing to point out, But there's lots of good stuff about Aurelia. The 5 toughness has actually proven fairly important in the format. It obviously can't block Lyra or anything without dying, or Doom Whisperer for that matter, but just about everything else it can block and live against. Plus, Justice Strike can't kill it. It's kind of important, Lots of other stuff can kill. Lava Coil, Lightning Strike, blah, blah. Damage-based forms of removal have a really tough time taking out an Aurelia, which has been very relevant so far. Another cool thing about Ray Ray is that she affects the board the turn she comes out, It's not much of a boost, but you'll always give a creature +2/+0 and at least 1 ability, which is pretty sweet. Giving Shalai +2/+0 and Vigilance is startlingly important a lot of the time, but remember that she can also target herself when she actually does get to swing in, which is really sweet. Having a 4/5, trample vigilance flying is actually a ridiculous card too. It's not quite the card that Lyra is in terms of pure stats, but it's really close, and it costs 1 mana less, so Aurelia is still really good in this deck. And don't discount the fact that it has Mentor. Mentoring Shalai can sometimes be really important, plus we've got a bunch of other stuff this can mentor too. Like, for instance, Rekindling Phoenix, which we'll actually play an entire playset of in this deck. Do not sleep on Rekindling Phoenix. I think this is far superior to the other 4-drops that we're playing in the deck, at least as far as the creatures go. And I still want the full playset here. I think people are sleeping on Rekindling Phoenix a little bit because they're so excited about things like Aurelia, and oh my god, we can finally play Shalai, she's good now. So I think people are freaking out a little bit and forgetting that Rekindling Phoenix is absolutely bonkers. Yeah, we've got a card like Lava Coil in the format to help answer it, but not too many decks actually play Lava Coil, even the ones with access to red in the main deck. Some of them will play it in the sideboard, but you'll almost never see like 4 copies of Lava Coil. So the card is fine even in a format with a decent answer for it, especially considering all the cards that aren't Lava Coil, things like Justice Strike and Assassin's Trophy are all cards that Rekindling Phoenix is really, really good against. But let's actually go back up to the 5-drop slot for just a second to stop off and talk about the 1 copy of Demanding Dragon that we're playing here, because I, personally, would rather play 1 Demanding Dragon than 4 Lyra Dawnbringer. And the card's not bad, it's got a Punisher mechanic on it, and those aren't known for being amazing, but at the very least, they'll sacrifice a guy, or they'll take a lava axe to the face, which they almost never want to do. It's just, neither one of these options are bad, no matter what they pick, and either way, you end up with a 5/5 flyer. Like, even if you're playing against tokens, and there are multiple tokens builds in the format right now, even if you're playing against them, though, they sacrifice a 1/1 guy, you still end up with a 5/5 flyer, so it's not the worst exchange in the world. But believe it or not, we are playing some creatures down here at the low end of the curve. A lot of these red-white decks are playing 8 or 10 creatures in the 2-drop slot, but I'm only playing 4, and they're all Adanto Vanguard. This, too, is really difficult to kill right now. Along with Rekindling Phoenix, we have 8 creatures that are more or less immune in most ways to cards like Assassin's Trophy, Justice Strike, Lightning Strike, a bunch of other stuff. Deafening Clarion, And I wanted to play Deafening Clarion, but I also wanted creatures that didn't have to die to it, so bing bong. Adanto Vanguard's a really good call, It's an aggressive creature. It's an early drop that can start getting the damage, ball rolling for us as quickly as possible. They have to answer it, but by the time they answer it, we're dropping Rekindling Phoenixes, Shalais, Aurelias, Lyras, whatever. So, this is something that can just soak up removal in the early game and sometimes soak up an exile spell like Vraska's Contempt, which people are cutting, but still seeing a little bit of play, But the more Vraska's Contempts people cut, the more it helps out our Vanguards and Phoenixes and stuff. So this is just a good card. It's always been a good card. It hasn't changed. And if we're going to play a 2-drop creature, which I think we do need to play at least 1, this is my, card of choice for this slot. But I'm also playing 4 copies of History of Benalia in the deck, just because I think there's no reason you wouldn't want to do that. Maybe go down to 3 copies of History, but I think it should definitely be in the deck. Even if you want to play something like Deafening Clarion, I've cut creatures like Boros Challenger, and I've cut things like Knight of Grace from the main deck, and Tajik from the main deck, Legion Warboss, because most of these are a non-bow with Deafening Clarion, and I really want Deafening Clarion to be able to fire off guilt-free on turn 3, So I cut most of those things, but even though History is still technically a non-bow with it, it's just one of the most powerful cards in the entire format. If you haven't noticed, we're playing a bunch of those, between Lyra Dawnbringer, Rekindling Phoenix, there's a ton of just raw power in this deck. And History definitely throws up a few more points on the power board, This thing is just really hard for a lot of decks to deal with. If you land it against control, that's 2 permanents, really 3 permanents, that they have to ultimately deal with, If they let it go off to Chapter 3, that could spell doom for just about any deck, even without a whole bunch of other knights in the main deck. This thing is just a house by itself in a box, even if you're ostensibly not doing too much else. So, and it leads into our bigger drops really well. You go History into Shalai or History into Aurelia, and those are just really good turn sequences. So History of Ben definitely deserves a place in the deck. I think that if we're kind of just making a rock-like deck that has like all the best cards in the format, yeah, there's no argument. History has to go in. But that's all the creatures. It's mostly top end in this deck, if you didn't notice. Once we hit turn 4 or 5, we can start playing these unbelievable threats our opponent has to deal with, and that can swing the game, help us turn the corner, but we got to get there. So most of our spell base is removal, especially relatively cheap removal. So let me run through all these real quick, starting with the 3 copies of Justice Strike. I've seen some players on 2 or even 0 main deck copies of Justice Strike, and I do not get it. This card is ridiculous. It's been called the Boros Doomblade, and for a reason. It just has this huge, wide net of targets it can hit, from Doom Whisperer to Lyra Dawnbringer to Galta to Steel Leaf Champion to many, many other creatures I don't have the time to name right now. This is just a bonkers piece of instant speed, super cheap removal that's very easy for us to play, so I'm actually thinking of pushing this to 4 copies. I don't necessarily want it to be dead against control in Game 1. In Game 2, it's actually not bad, because Blue-White and other Esper control and stuff usually sides in Lyra Dawnbringer for Game 2. So this still has relevance, in Game 2 against even control decks. It's just an unbelievable card right now that has a giant range of targets. I'll also play 2 main deck Lava Coils in here, and you could make an argument for Lightning Strike in this slot, but we're seeing a lot more Adanto Vanguards, which Lava Coil is very good against, and we are seeing some Rekindling Phoenixes and stuff. We're obviously seeing more Shalais. Lava Coil pretty good against that too, so there's just lots of targets for Lava Coil right now that make me want to play it just a little bit over Lightning Strike. But I'm also running 2 Response Resurgence in the deck, which I have seen in some builds and not in others. It's not an incredibly popular card, but I like a lot about this. This gives us another relatively early and very easy to cast removal option. Starting as early as turn 2 if we absolutely want to use it. We can use this to kill just about anything in the game of Magic in Standard right now. There's some stuff it doesn't hit, like Doom Whisperer and Carnage Tyrant, which not a whole lot can hit, but, aside from that, 5 damage on an attacking or blocking creature can kill almost anything, all the way up to a Lyra Dawnbringer or an Aurelia. So the card is actually dubbed for that reason and that reason alone, but it's also got a whole other mode on it that can be really important sometimes. Sometimes you'll want another attack step, so you can get in for 10 with a Lyra Dawnbringer and gain 10 in 1 turn. It's nothing bad about that, but, obviously getting another, Aurelia activation or trigger, whatever, or, letting even just Shalai or a Rekindling Phoenix swing in again can be good enough. Getting 8 off of Rekindling Phoenixes in 1 turn is a good enough reason to play this card. So, it's cheap removal. It's decent against the aggro and mid-range decks for that reason, but it's also decent against the mid-range and control decks, because if we can get another attack step in unfettered, then sometimes we can end the game out of nowhere. But we're running 3 copies of Deafening Clarion, and this is one of the reasons the deck is constructed the way that it's constructed. Fewer creatures on the low end, and that's because, again, I wanted fewer non-bows with this card. Just about everything from 1 to 3, this will kill for you, and even some other stuff, like this kills Vine Mare importantly, so Deafening Clarion is just one of the best sweepers in the entire format right now, in a format that kind of lacks sweepers. So, once we get to turn 4 or 5, we can really swing the game, turn things around, and take things from there. But we need a way to bridge the gap, and Deafening Clarion is perfect for that. Works well with Adanto Vanguard, already kind of touched on that, but Adanto Vanguard, if we pay 4 life, can live through it and then swing in, so we only net lose 1 life in that equation. But also, most of our big stuff survives this. Shalai, Demanding Dragon, Lyra Dawnbringer, Aurelia, they all survive this card. So being able to just wipe out half of the board and then get in with 3 or 4 big flyers, that's sweet too. And we can give them lifelink to really put the game out of reach. There's just absolutely nothing wrong with this card. But last removal piece, I swear, is the 2 copies of Conclave Tribunal in the deck. And we aren't playing a ton of creatures or anything, but this is cheaper than 4 mana a lot of the time, even if we have like 1 creature out. It works well with History of Benalia. If you're not going to be swinging in with a knight on turn 4, you can always play Tribunal for 2 mana and still have mana left over for Justice Strike, Adanto Vanguard, Response, whatever you want to do. So sometimes it can be important to help double spell, on turn 4, turn 5 to play this card. It's just an answer for Teferi, which is important, and any other Planeswalker for that matter. Vraska, no matter what comes after the comma, this kills Vraska. So that's pretty sweet, it takes out things like Vanguard if we absolutely need to. Rekindling Phoenix, and enchantments like History of Benalia, artifacts people might be janking around with, so you never know. You never know what you might need. This is just a catch-all answer that can sometimes cost like 1 or 2 mana. But we're not actually quite done with the main deck yet. There's a couple of more cards left to cover here, and they are a little bit different, but I think they're actually really important to put in this deck moving forward if you can afford to. And I say if you can afford to, because I've slotted in 2 copies of Karn, Scion of Urza in the deck, and it fixes a fair amount of problems. Now, to be clear, when I say it fixes a lot of problems, it mostly fixes the problem of not having a way to draw cards to get card advantage, which is a serious problem for this deck. It's actually the one main problem that the deck has, and Karn helps us solve it a little bit. Plus, if you did need more. This can also generate constructs. Sometimes, it's not always the best thing in the world, but sometimes when you need chump blockers or against a control deck, if this is your only way of generating threats at a given time, then it's fine for that too. It snowballs. The more it's left on the battlefield, the bigger the guys it creates. So sometimes that can be really important too when you need it to be. So just Karn does all the good things. Let's not forget Karn exists. He draws cards, and that's what this deck wants to do. But the last slot in the main deck is reserved for one copy of Treasure Map for a few different reasons, I wanted another 2-drop card for the deck that wasn't a creature but was a permanent, and Treasure Map is probably the best thing that you could play right now in that avenue. Plus, even though it doesn't immediately draw us cards, it still lets us use any extra mana that we have to scry bad cards away. That's pretty sweet, Again, it's not quite drawing, but scrying is the next best thing in a deck like this. That's good. And it has a little bit of synergy with Karn, obviously, It's an artifact towards its construct count, and once you flip it over, it gives you 3 artifacts towards its construct count, and another way to draw cards. So yeah, Treasure Map I actually think belongs in the deck as possibly more than a one-of, to be honest. But while we have the slot for it, I'm at least going to play the 1. Now we're playing 25 lands in this deck, and there's actually a few different things I want to say about this. There are 18 sources of each color, so we have no problem getting white or red sources in this deck, whether we want to do History on turn 3 or Rekindling Phoenix on turn 4, sometimes both. We have ways of doing that in this deck. It looks a little weird to see 3 Boros Guildgate, but note that we don't really have any 1-drops. Worth noting in this deck whatsoever, so our first turn is basically free. We can drop a Boros Guildgate. Now here's the sideboard I'm running, and heads up, this is kind of a transformative sideboard. Against control decks, we will board into straight up Boros aggro to give them more early threats to have to deal with. Things like Knight of Grace, Legion Warboss, Tajik, these are all great against control decks. And sometimes, once they realize we're a mid-range deck, they'll side out a lot of their removal for game 2, which is even more beneficial to a plan like this. But we do have some options against aggro. If we're seeing Adanto Vanguards, or Rekindling Phoenix, or really anything with Forked Upness or less, Lava Coil can come in for us if we wanted to, and Cleansing Nova can as well, because it gives us play against artifacts, enchantments, aggro decks, and to top it all off, it's an answer to a card like Carnage Tyrant. So I think there's a lot of ways, or reasons, to play the 1 copy of Nova. But finally, Remorseful Cleric. That looks weird. You probably haven't seen this in any, white sideboards this season at all, but I actually really like Remorseful Cleric against the Golgari decks right now. Those decks play things like the Eldest Reborn and Golgari Finebroker, and even a couple of other cards to get value out of their graveyard. Things like Find and Finality. They'll play that all the time. So I really like this against those decks because, first of all, not only does it wipe their graveyard, keep them from getting value out of it from things like Izoni and blah blah, but it's also a flying creature, another flying creature, this one really low on the curve. And again, those Golgari decks have a problem dealing with flying creatures, by and large. So this is just another good option against them because it does 2 things they hate. Alright, now before we get to the power rankings, let's do what we've been doing and talk about some cards I didn't play, or some directions you could take this deck if you really wanted to. I've already talked about a couple, Angels, Boros Aggro is in the sideboard, but there's some really weird stuff you could do for this deck that I did consider. For instance, stay with me here, a single copy of Sigiled Sword of Valoron doesn't actually seem too bad to me in some ways, First of all, it's an artifact, so it works with Karn in that way, that's kind of cool. It makes the construct tokens 4 power as soon as you equip them, no matter what. So that seems pretty sweet right there, It also creates knights, so it has some synergy with History of Benalia. I could see all of that being pretty decent, and putting the sword on a card like, Aurelia or Lyra seems really good too. With this out, you could always give the Aurelia boost to the tokens you're creating on the next combat step. So all of that seems decent, and I could maybe see a copy of Sigiled Sword, even if it looks a little wonky. As far as entirely different directions you could take this deck in, there's obviously Boros Soldiers getting a little bit of traction right now because things like Boros Challenger, that's a soldier. Lots of white 1-drops are soldiers. Goblin Banneret's a soldier. Tajik is a soldier. So you could just top it all off with Radiant Destiny. Call it a day. Soldier Tribal could actually work, but one of the crazy things you could do with this deck that I won't discuss too in-depth here because I'm kind of keeping it up my sleeve, but I at least want to point it out in case it becomes a thing before I get a chance to cover it, is Naya Legends, which looks a little bit similar to this. Obviously, a lot of our cards are legends. We've got Lyra, we've got Shalai, we've got Aurelia, but we could add things like Imara, or possibly even Shana to the list, and just have, with Ajani too, we just add legends and come up with 20 some odd 20 plus legends really easily. You know, we could even play stuff like Maverick Fane in the 3-drop slot to create tokens, or maybe we could play Captain Punch to get a little bit more, you know, not only mana fixing but ramp for that matter. And I really like that idea because not only would it let us play Mox Amber, you know, I'm not going to go on too long about it, but I do like Mox Amber. You guys know that about me by now, and I'm always trying to make it work. I'm that guy. But it could really work in this deck, as could Urza's Ruinous Blast, which could be a one-sided exile-based board wipe that could just crush anybody. That actually looks really good. So I actually think that there's a case for Naya Legends right now, you know? But anyway, enough me trying to make Mox Amber work. Stop trying to make Fetch work. In any case, let's get to the power rankings. Final score of 68. A powerful deck indeed. The power score is not a lie. Just about every single card in the deck is an extremely high-level playable Magic card in Standard right now. Seriously, like, we're not making any concessions for synergy or consistency, really, in this deck. You go down the list and you're like, yep, that's a good card, that's a good card, that's a good card. There's no single card in the deck you're like, that kind of looks bad. I guess Response Resurgence is the closest thing to that, but I'm telling you, that's a good Magic card. So, you know, this is kind of just a pile of good cards. It's why it's not, like, crazy with the synergy category, but there are some small synergies in the deck that you may have noticed. You know, Angel Synergy, a couple other things, Karn Synergies and whatever. But by and large, just a pile of good cards, and there's nothing wrong with that. In terms of, like, pure power, this is maybe the single best deck in the format if that's what you're looking for. I think we are sacrificing a little bit more offense than this deck usually gets to play to up our defense by a point, evening them out a bit, but it totally matters and it totally makes sense, especially given that if you run across any of the more aggressive builds of this deck, things like Deafening Clarion and all the other early game removal that we're playing, that they're not playing, are going to really help us out against them. We turn the corner the same way, but I feel like our early game is much stronger against those aggressive decks and the other aggressive decks in the format. And if you are interested in trying it out, or even if you don't want to try it out, you just want to look at the list in kind of a concise location, just hit the first links in the description down there, and they'll take you over to TCG Player. My sponsors, you may have noticed that from the intro, but they do help me out around here. They keep the lights on and such, but they're good to me. But they're also the cheapest place you're going to get this deck online. It's $4.25 on TCG Player. That means it's going to be well over $500 from some outlets. They're just the cheapest place you can get this deck. Don't overpay for it if you're going to buy it. And with that, pretty sure I'm tapped out for this one. Now, if you're a patron, or you want to be a patron, whatever, don't despair. I know I didn't let you vote on this one, but there's a vote up right now. There's a poll going on as soon as I upload this video. So if you're done with this video, go on over to Patreon and vote for the deck you want to see on Sunday. Aside from that, second call to action, do the YouTube stuff. Just like the video, subscribe if you're new, follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev, and donate $1 on Patreon if you haven't done it yet. You know, just for $1 a month, you get to participate in polls, vote on the decks you want to see next. I'll let you know like what decks we're doing 24 hours before we do them. Try to give you a lot of value for $1. So if you haven't done it, sign up for the Patreon if you have $1 to spare every 30 days or so. That said, I think I'm actually done for this one. This video probably ran long, but I don't care. You don't care. We enjoy spending time together. So, until next time, thanks for watching, my wizards. I've been Deb from The Place, and I've already said thanks for watching. It's kind of weird to mess up the order of it. But anyway, spread love and be kind. Do that. If you do nothing else, you don't have to buy the deck. I don't care what you do. Spread love and be kind.
I hang it up, new persona. I'm hotter than Arizona, my aura corona, and I'll be sicker than pneumonia.